The moment a man I had never seen before pressed a folded note into my hand at the pharmacy counter and whispered, "Don't open this until you are alone." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet in a way I had not felt since the morning they told me my husband was gone. The pharmacy on Cartwright Street had been my Tuesday routine for 2 years, ever since my husband passed and the prescriptions became mine alone to manage. The afternoon crowd moved around me in the usual way, slow-moving, bundled against the November cold that had come early to rural Kentucky that year. I had just signed for my medication when the man appeared at my elbow. He was perhaps 70, heavyset, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent years noticing things other people missed. He wore a gray jacket and did not smile. He pressed the folded paper against my palm and walked away before I could speak, disappearing through the glass doors and into the parking lot as if he had dissolved into the gray November air. I stood at the counter for a moment that felt longer than it was. The pharmacist handed me my bag and said something I did not hear. I nodded and walked to my car and sat with the note in my lap, without opening it, watching the parking lot, wondering if the man was still there. He was not. My name is Margaret Calloway. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse and then another decade in home health care. And in all that time, I believed I was a woman who did not frighten easily. I believed that until that Tuesday in November, sitting in my car with a stranger's note in my hands, feeling something I could only describe as dread settle into my chest like a stone. I drove home with the note still folded. My house sat at the end of a gravel road in Harlan County, a white farmhouse with green shutters that my husband and I had bought together 33 years ago. We raised our daughter there. We painted every room twice. We buried our dog in the backyard under a cedar tree and promised each other we would never sell it. After my husband died, my daughter began calling it the money pit. She said it lovingly at first, the way children soften things they plan to say repeatedly. Then she stopped softening it. I sat at my kitchen table and unfolded the note. The handwriting was deliberate and slightly shaky, the writing of a man whose hands had aged ahead of the rest of him. Your daughter is planning to have you declared incompetent. She has already retained an attorney. The policy on this house is the reason. Your husband knew something was wrong before he died. He told me to find you if it came to this. Below that, a phone number, nothing else. I read it 3 times. Then I set it on the table and looked out the window at the field behind the house, at the cedar tree at the far edge of the yard. My husband had planted that tree the year our daughter was born. He said it would outlast all of us. The week before, my daughter had called from Louisville to tell me she and my son-in-law were coming for Thanksgiving early. She had said it the way she said most things lately, as if the decision had already been made and I was only being informed. I had not thought much of it. She was my daughter. I loved her in the uncomplicated way I had loved her since the moment I first held her, even when she grew impatient with me. Even when she looked at this house the way her husband looked at everything, like a contractor walking a job site. Now I sat in my kitchen and tried to remember when the impatience had started and whether I had missed something I should have seen. I did not call the number that night. I put the note in the front pocket of the Bible I kept on my nightstand and told myself I would think clearly in the morning. But I did not sleep. I lay in the dark listening to the house settle and thought about the word incompetent and what it would mean if it was applied to me. The house would have to be managed. My accounts would need oversight. Someone would need to be appointed. Someone like my daughter. My husband's name was Frank. He had worked 30 years in county government, land records and property assessments, the kind of work that made him careful and quiet and deeply suspicious of anything that did not add up on paper. In the last year of his life, he had been more quiet than usual. I had thought it was his health. He had been sick longer than either of us admitted. Now I wondered if I had been wrong about the reason. I got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the note again. Then I called the number. It rang 4 times. Then the man's voice, the same voice I imagined hearing from the careful handwriting. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. Thank you for calling. I told him I wanted to know who he was and how he knew my husband. His name was Ray Holt. He had worked in the same county office as my husband for 11 years before he retired. He said my husband had come to him 14 months before he died, not long after he discovered something in our financial records that did not belong there. He said Frank had asked him to keep a document for safekeeping. He said he had held onto it for 18 months and then started hearing things in town that told him it was time to find me. What kind of things? I asked. The kind, he said, that involve attorneys and insurance agents and a daughter who has been telling people her mother is not well. My hand tightened around the phone. I am very well, I said. I know that, he said. That is why I am calling. He told me he could not say more over the phone. He said he would leave a package in the mailbox at the end of my road the following morning, and I should retrieve it before anyone else arrived. He said I should not tell my daughter he had contacted me. Then he paused and said, Frank loved you very much, Mrs. Calloway. He tried to handle this quietly. I am sorry he ran out of time. The line went quiet. I held the phone for a long moment before I set it down. I did not go back to sleep. I sat in the kitchen until the light came up over the hill behind the house, and then I walked to the end of the gravel road in my coat and boots and retrieved the manila envelope from my mailbox before the morning had fully started. Inside was a USB drive in a plastic bag and a handwritten letter in my husband's handwriting, sealed with tape around the edges, the way he always sealed things he considered important. I stood at the end of the road in the November cold and held the envelope against my chest and felt something shift inside me, some internal structure I had not known was holding me together until I felt it begin to give way. I waited until I was inside, door locked, coffee hot. Before I opened the letter, Margaret, he wrote, if Ray found you, then what I feared has already begun. I need you to know that I did not tell you because I wanted to protect you, and I understand now that protecting you from the truth was not the same as keeping you safe. He wrote for 3 pages in his careful, unhurried handwriting. He told me that he had discovered, while reviewing his own estate paperwork, that several documents had been altered. Our joint life insurance policy, the one we had held for 22 years, had been updated 18 months prior. The beneficiary had been changed from both of us to our daughter alone, and the amendment included a clause that would accelerate the payout in the event of my incapacitation. He wrote that he had not signed that amendment. He wrote that he had looked at his own signature on that document and knew with certainty that he had never held that pen. He wrote that he had confronted our daughter. She denied it, he wrote. She cried. She said I was confused, that my memory was going, that I had signed it and forgotten. She said it so calmly and so completely that for 3 days I almost believed her. Then I pulled the original policy from the fireproof box in the closet and compared the signatures, and I knew. I have known for months. I did not know what to do with what I knew. I sat at the kitchen table and read the letter twice through. Outside the window, the field was gray and still, the cedar tree at its edge bare now with winter coming. I thought about all the times my daughter had sat in this kitchen over the past year, asking careful questions about my health, my memory, my medications. I thought about the way she and my son-in-law sometimes exchanged a look, the same look, quick and private, when they thought I was not watching. I had always believed that look was worry. Now I understood it was calculation. My daughter called that afternoon. She and my son-in-law were coming Friday, she said, 2 days earlier than planned. She wanted to talk about the house. She said it the way she had been saying things for months, gently, carefully, the way you would talk to someone fragile. She said she had been in touch with a doctor who specialized in senior care assessments. She thought it might be a good idea for me to have a thorough evaluation, just to establish a baseline, just to have it on record, just in case. I told her that sounded fine. I told her I would make up the guest room. My voice did not shake. After I hung up, I sat without moving for a long time. Then I went to my husband's study and closed the door and opened the laptop he had left behind and plugged in the USB drive. There were photographs. Night photographs, grainy but clear enough, of documents spread across a desk I recognized as my son-in-law's home office. There were scanned images of the forged amendment, side by side with my husband's actual signature from other documents, the differences visible even to an untrained eye. There were email exchanges between my daughter and an attorney in Louisville that my husband had somehow obtained, short and careful and damning, discussions of timelines and assessments, and the word capacity used more than once. There was also a name I did not recognize, Sandra Morrow, listed as a contact in the attorney's correspondence, identified as an insurance investigator. My husband had written her name in the margin of his letter with a note beside it. She already knows. She is waiting for the family to move. I sat in my husband's chair and looked at the photographs and felt grief and fury arrive at the same time, braided together so tightly I could not separate them. Not because my daughter had done this, not yet, not fully, but because my husband had carried this knowledge alone for over a year. Because he had died with it still on his shoulders. Because the last year of his life, when I thought we were simply managing illness and slowness and the ordinary weight of aging, he had been managing something else entirely, something I should have been standing beside him for. I called the number Ray Holt had given me. I asked him for Sandra Morrow's contact information. He said he had expected I would ask. He gave it to me without hesitation. She answered on the first ring. She told me she worked for the State Insurance Fraud Division, that she had been building a file for 8 months, and that the only thing she had been waiting for was for my daughter and son-in-law to make a formal legal move, which would serve as the final documented step in the pattern. She told me she was sorry I was learning about this now, and that she had tried to move faster, but these cases required patience. She told me she had spoken with Ray Holt multiple times, and that she was confident in what the evidence showed. She asked me if I would be willing to help accelerate the process. I told her my daughter was arriving in 2 days. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Calloway, I need you to understand that what I'm about to ask of you will require a great deal of composure. It will require you to sit across from your daughter knowing what you know and give nothing away." I told her I had worked 31 years in emergency nursing. I had sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives and kept my hands steady and my voice calm. I thought I could manage. She almost smiled. I could hear it. She said, "Then here is what I need you to do." The 2 days were the longest of my life, not because of fear, though fear was present, because of memory, because I kept moving through the house and finding my daughter everywhere in it, the child she had been layered over the woman she had become, and I kept trying to understand when one had become incompatible with the other. I found the photograph on the hallway shelf from her 8th birthday, gap-toothed and laughing in the backyard under the cedar tree. I found the card she had sent when my husband was first diagnosed, full of real feeling, words that had made me cry. I found myself unable to reconcile the woman in those words with the woman on the other end of those emails, the one who had used the word capacity like a tool. I did not sleep the night before they arrived. I sat in my husband's chair, in his study with the USB drive in my palm, and I talked to him the way I had been talking to him since he died, quietly, without expecting an answer. I told him I understood now why he had kept it from me. I told him I wished he had not. I told him I was going to finish what he started, and that I needed him to trust me the way he always had. My daughter and my son-in-law arrived on Friday morning carrying overnight bags and a casserole dish and bright, careful smiles. My son-in-law wore the expression he always wore in this house, polite and slightly impatient, the expression of a man who is humoring a situation he expects to resolve shortly. My daughter hugged me and held on a moment too long, the way you hold someone when you are conscious of something they do not know yet. We ate lunch. We talked about the drive down from Louisville, about the weather, about the neighbor's new barn. My son-in-law made a comment about the roof and how the gutters needed attention. My daughter mentioned, casually, that she had brought some paperwork she wanted me to look over. "Nothing urgent," she said. "Just some things for peace of mind." I said that sounded fine. After lunch, my daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened a folder. Inside were several documents, professionally prepared. A power of attorney form, a healthcare directive, a letter from an attorney outlining the process for what she called a voluntary capacity assessment. I looked at the documents for a long time. I did not reach for them. She said, "Mom, this is just in case. This is just so that if something ever happened, we would have the legal standing to help you." She said it the way she had said everything for months, gently, patiently. The way you speak to someone whose understanding you are no longer entirely counting on. I said, "I see." My son-in-law leaned forward. He said it was actually standard practice, that most families did this kind of planning, that it was nothing to feel uncomfortable about. I said, "Tell me about the insurance policy." The table went quiet in a particular way. My daughter said, "What?" I said it again, clearly, watching her face. "The insurance policy your father and I held for 22 years. The amendment added 18 months ago. The one with the signature that is not your father's and is not mine." My daughter's face changed. Not all at once. It shifted the way ice shifts before it breaks, a series of small structural changes that were visible if you were watching for them. My son-in-law started to say something. I said, "I know about the emails. I know about the attorney in Louisville. I know what the word capacity means in that correspondence, and I know what accelerated payout means in the context of my incapacitation. Your father knew too. He spent the last year of his life knowing, and I spent that year thinking his silence was about illness when it was about protecting me from something he could not find a way to stop." My daughter said my name, very quietly. I said, "He left evidence. He trusted someone to hold it until I was ready to see it. I am ready." What happened next happened quickly. My son-in-law stood up from the table. My daughter reached for the folder as if she could remove it from the conversation. And then there was a knock at the front door, 2 sharp, deliberate taps, the kind that are not asking permission. I went to the door and opened it. Sandra Morrow stood on the porch with 2 other investigators, their credentials already in hand. Behind them, a county sheriff's vehicle sat in the driveway with the engine running. My son-in-law said, "What is this?" His voice had lost its polish. Sandra stepped inside calmly. She identified herself and her colleagues. She addressed my daughter and son-in-law by name. She explained that they were being taken in for formal questioning in connection with an ongoing insurance fraud investigation, and that anything said from this point forward would be recorded. My daughter looked at me. Her eyes were wide and wet, and for one moment she looked exactly like the 8-year-old in the photograph on my hallway shelf. The gap-toothed girl, under the cedar tree. I looked back at her, and I did not look away. My son-in-law was taken out first. He did not go quietly, but he went. My daughter went more slowly, her arms close to her body, her face composed in a way that cost her something. I could see that much. At the door she stopped and turned back. She said, "I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I said, "No. You wanted to make sure I was managed. There is a difference. Your father understood that difference, and he died with it on his conscience. I hope it lands differently for you." She did not answer. She walked out the door. I watched the cars pull down the gravel drive and disappear past the tree line, and then I stood on the porch in the November cold for a long time, listening to the silence the way you listen to a room after a long and difficult storm has finally passed through it. Ray Holt called that evening to ask how I was. I told him I was standing. He said that was enough for one day. I thought he was right. The weeks that followed were not simple. They rarely are. Even when the right thing happens. There were statements to give and documents to review and an attorney of my own to retain, one I chose myself from a list I found independently, without help from anyone who had a stake in the outcome. Sandra Morrow kept me informed at every stage. The forged signatures were confirmed by a forensic examiner. The attorney's emails established intent clearly enough that the case moved faster than she had expected. My son-in-law's cooperation was offered early and cost him very little compared to what my daughter's attorney asked for and did not receive. I did not attend the hearings, not the first ones, and not the last. I was not ready to sit in a room with my daughter behind a table that had been built to manage the distance between what she had done and what would happen to her for it. That kind of readiness takes longer to arrive than justice does. And I had learned by then not to rush what was not ready. Instead, I walked. I walked the property every morning the way my husband used to, out past the garden, along the fence line, through the bare-limbed trees to the far edge of the field where the ground sloped down toward the creek. I walked it in the cold, and then I walked it again when the cold began to ease, and the first small green things pushed up through the dark earth the way they always did in early spring, reliable in a way that nothing else had felt in a long time. I had the insurance policy corrected and restored. I had the power of attorney documents shredded, both the ones my daughter had brought and the earlier ones I found in my son-in-law's email attachments that had never made it to my kitchen table. I had the house assessed and the roof repaired and the gutters replaced, not because my son-in-law had been right to notice them, but because the house was mine and it deserved attention. I now had time and clarity to give it. Ray Holt came for coffee on a Thursday in February. He sat at my kitchen table and drank 2 cups, and told me about the years he had worked with my husband, the small details, the way Frank always brought his own lunch, the way he stayed late on county record days because he said someone had to, the way he treated the work as if it mattered because he genuinely believed it did. Ray said he had been carrying the weight of that USB drive for 18 months, and that he was relieved, in the particular way of men who have kept promises longer than expected, to have it returned to its proper place. I thanked him for finding me when he did. He said my husband had asked him to watch. He said watching was the least he could do for a man who had never done anything small in the time he knew him. I thought about that for a long time after Ray left, about what it means to be the kind of person that others keep promises for, even after you are gone. My husband had never been a loud man. He had never been the kind of person who announced what he was doing or asked to be admired for it. He had simply done what he believed was right and trusted that the people around him understood the value of that, even when the people around him included a daughter who had stopped understanding somewhere along the way. I found my way back to the photograph on the hallway shelf. I looked at it for a long time, the gap-toothed girl under the cedar tree. I kept it where it was, not because I had forgiven everything or understood all of it, but because she had been real once, that girl, and so had the love I felt for her, and I did not believe in pretending those things had not existed just because they had become complicated. I visited her once, 6 months later. She was staying with her sister in Lexington while things were resolved. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had simply started seeing her more clearly. She could not look at me at first. When she finally did, she said she was sorry in the flat voice of someone who is not sure yet if they mean it but knows they need to say it. I told her the truth. I said, "Your father loved you without condition for every day of his life, and the last thing I want is to spend the rest of mine without the daughter he raised. But I need you to understand something. This house is not an asset. This land is not an investment. It is the place where your father and I built something real together, and no policy, no attorney, no legal maneuver will ever change what it means to me or what it cost him to protect it. If you cannot live with that, I understand. but I need you to be honest with me about where you stand." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't start out wanting to hurt anyone." "I know," I said. "That is the most frightening part." I drove home that evening on the highway through the eastern Kentucky hills, with the windows down, even though the air had a chill in it. I drove past the turnoff for Harlan, and the long curve of road that led back into the county, and all the way down the gravel drive to my white farmhouse, with its green shutters, the house my husband and I had painted together, the house where my daughter had learned to walk, and where my husband had died, and where I had survived something I had not known was coming. I got out of the car and stood for a moment in the evening quiet. The cedar tree at the far edge of the yard had leafed out over the spring, fuller than it had been in years, reaching up in a way that looked, in the fading light, almost deliberate. My husband had planted it the year our daughter was born. He said it would outlast all of us. I was beginning to think he had been right about that, the way he had been right about most things, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the patient and unhurried way of a man who understood that truth does not require announcing. It only requires someone willing to stand on it when the ground shifts, and the people you trusted most look at you with eyes you no longer recognize and ask you to step aside. I had not stepped aside, and I was still here. At 68, I had believed that the most difficult things were behind me, that I had already passed through the seasons of life that required the most of a person. I had been wrong about that, and I was grateful, in the strange and particular way of women who have survived more than they intended to, that I had discovered it when I did and not later. The land was still mine. The house still stood, and the truth that had nearly cost everything, the truth my husband had carried alone through the last year of his life so that I would not have to carry it before I was ready, rested now where it belonged, not buried, not hidden, not managed or maneuvered or folded into legal language and set across a kitchen table for a woman too old to object. Known. What someone takes from you through fear or deception will never hold the way the things you choose to keep, and the love that asks nothing in return. The kind my husband left behind in letters and records, and a USB drive in a stranger's mailbox. That kind does not diminish when the person is gone. It waits, it prepares, and when the moment comes, it finds its way to you, even if the hands delivering it belong to someone you have never met. I walked inside, lit the lamp in the front room, and made myself a cup of tea I actually drank.